Hello, everybody. Patrick Brenner here, president of the Southwest Public Policy Institute. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of SPPI-TV, the public policy podcast of the Institute. We're on episode 22, and we're here today to talk to Mr. Dan Walters from Cal Matters about California and what happened, what's happening, what is going to happen, and the like. I wanted to do a couple of housekeeping things with Dowd before we jump into the conversation. Dowd, we've had another awesome press week. We got some really nice
We do
coverage
a lot with a
from.
little, don't we?
Yeah, yes, this is very true. We do a lot with a little. KRQE, local station in New Mexico, gave us some press time. Acknowledging our litigation against the city of Albuquerque. A little bit on that is the city of Albuquerque started instituting a automated speed enforcement program in the form of speed cameras, capturing license plate information and automatically dispersing citations through their company in Florida that they've contracted with. And we've actually asked for an opportunity to inspect the citation database because we believe that the geographic location of the cameras is actually leading to or could be leading to disproportionate impacts, specifically with low income or minority drivers. And we wanted to find out if that was the case. But the city of Albuquerque, known for its stonewalling, their city clerk, Ethan Watson, we've called him. I called him this week. I tried to figure things out with him this week. He's not responsive. I sent him emails. He's not responsive. I mean, that was one of the things that I didn't like about the KOAT version of the story is that they were really they were trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he's been totally AWOL on us, just not fulfilling his transparency obligations under the law. So great coverage there. You're doing some great work on the Colorado topic this week, Dowd. And then we are also you were on the podcast with the Nevada group. Tell me about that.
Yes, Nevada Policy, and you can check it out on our website, southwestpolicy.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a former employee of that think tank out in Nevada, based in Las Vegas, and had a great talk with them. That podcast was put up on Wednesday, and we actually talked a little bit about California and the relationship between Nevada and California. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm probably going to be going back at some point on that one. I know a little bit about Nevada. I don't know as much about Nevada as our guest knows about California, but I know a little bit about Nevada, and Patrick has to occasionally pull me back from writing exclusively about Nevada in the American Southwest because it is such an interesting place, a wild and crazy and beautiful and wonderful and horrible and bemusing state, which it's unique in our region and in our country. Nevada stands alone.
Yes, it does. Well, without further ado, let's get Dan in here and start talking about California, which is not Nevada.
No,
Dan,
very
thanks so
different
much
places.
for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, hi.
Dan's on audio today. We can't see Mr. Walter's beautiful face.
We were having some connectivity issues earlier with his California internet, so he's just going to be on audio today.
But to honor our guest, ladies and gentlemen, I will be temporarily putting my in and out hat on to honor our guest who's forgotten more about California than I will ever know, and I want to show everyone my Ralph's bag right here. So I know a little bit about California, and it is in our zone of interest in the Southwest Public Policy Institute in our 8-state region. Dan is a columnist, and Dan actually started out in journalism as a teenager. This is a man who's forgotten more about California than most of us will ever know, and it's really great for us to have him on the air today on our Friday before Labor Day. Dan, thank you so much. I'm just going to start with a quote, and then I'm going to ask Dan about the past before we sort of get caught up with the future. This was written by Wendell Cox, a demographer, a transportation analyst from Southern California. He wrote this a couple of months ago. For nearly all the 20th century, California was the national growth leader. In every census from 1930 to 2000, California added more residents than any other state. In 1900, California ranked 21st in population, but by 1970 secured the top position, which it has occupied since then by a mile. But much has changed. U.S. Census Bureau estimates indicate that California's population has declined 3 years in a row after having never reported a population loss since statehood in 1850. U.S. Census Bureau data also indicate that there has been a net outflow of residents to other states of 3.5 million former residents since 2000, as housing affordability has deteriorated and the cost of living has become more challenging. Dan, our native Californian, our expert in California, you live the vast majority of your life in California. What is going on in your state, and just personally, what have you seen as you've lived your life in the Golden State the last couple decades, and particularly the last few years, not looking so golden anymore?
Yeah, well, I wrote a column about that recently and just said basically California's hit a plateau. It always used to be everything was growing. The economy was growing, the population was growing, its economic impact was growing, and so forth. And suddenly California's hit this kind of plateau. And whether it continues to be plateaued or decline or go ahead is probably the overarching question in California right now. And by the way, you mentioned Nevada. When they originally set the boundaries of California as a state, we could have included Nevada in California. Back in 1850, but California decided it didn't want Nevada and turned it down.
Yeah, Nevada. Yes, Nevada. There's a whole lot of nothing in Nevada. They didn't even find the gold the serious gold in Nevada in the Carlin Trend up until the late 1980s. But yeah, but you were born in California. You've lived most of your life in California. I was raised on the East Coast, where yes, people might roll their eyes when the word California came up, but there was a recognition that something, you could say, oh, the surfers and the hippies and all that, but there was a recognition that California was a trendsetter for the nation. California was a booming economy. California had so many natural assets, and it was such a forward-looking place. Even the New England Puritans that I grew up with, who would laugh about those wacky Californians, there was a level of respect. There was a grudging admission in the Northeast and New England that something very special was about California.
Yeah, we were the 800-pound gorilla
Yeah.
of the country in a sense. And by the way, I wasn't born in California. I was born in Kansas, but that's neither here nor there. I have lived almost all of my life in California.
Sure.
So what made California that kind of well, I think Ronald Reagan said shining something on the shining
Yes.
heaven or something. I don't know what he said. Well, it was a lot of things, but a lot of it was just kind of a kind of a cultural thing that California was a place of new beginnings, that you could come from someplace else, some other country, some other state, some other region, and there was opportunity here to make it. There was not a class structure in California. It was a very kind of wide open sort of place, and that was true. And it served California very well for many, many, many decades until it didn't. You mentioned California losing population, which is true. And people have been leaving California more than have been coming in. That's true, but that actually has been going on for about 20 years. That fact of net loss of population and state-to-state migration has been going on for about 20 years. What's new about it in recent years is our birth rate dropped dramatically. Our death rate started going up because people were getting older, demographic change. And probably most of all, we stopped getting big flows of immigrants from other countries into California. So our population just kind of stagnated and then started to decline due to democratic things. When the birth rate dropped, the death rate went up, and immigration fell off from other countries, then the state-to-state migration losses became more important. Mm-hmm. And that's why there has been this net loss of population. And why? Why are people leaving California? Well, the cost of living. It's very, very expensive to live here. Gasoline right now is $5 a gallon in California. That's $1 higher than probably just about any other place, maybe $1.50 higher. Housing, the median price of a house in California is over $800,000. Rents are terrifically high. And so as a result of which, we have this economic divide in California between the educated homeowners and the less educated or sometimes non-educated renters. And in places like Los Angeles, which has the highest level of poverty within California, which has the highest level of poverty in the United States, what you have there is a lot of very low income people in Los Angeles trying to cope with very high housing costs. And those who have the wherewithal and the gumption leave. They go someplace else where they can live more easily than they can in California. A lot of young people leave. Why? Because they despair of buying houses. I was talking to a friend of mine last night, who has a daughter and son-in-law in Irvine, California, in Orange County. And he's an artist, a cartoon artist, and they're trying to buy a house in Irvine, California, where the median cost of a house is $1.5 million.
Wow.
Which means you have to have a $300,000 down payment, and then you're looking at $7,000 or so a month in mortgage costs. People just can't afford that kind of thing. Many people can't afford it. A few can, and this drives people out of the state. There's, I'm sure, people leaving for political reasons or other reasons as well. But the difficulty of making it in California now with high housing and other living costs, not just housing, particularly, like I say, gasoline, for example, utility costs are very high and so forth and so on. We have a housing shortage, and that just drives up housing prices. Why do we have a housing shortage? Because we haven't been building housing in California for a whole variety of reasons, mostly involving environmental opposition to housing developments, the local opposition in neighborhoods to housing developments, particularly housing that multifamily, middle-income housing and low-income housing is a pariah in many communities. They just won't accept it, and there you are. I mean, if you can't build the housing, you're going to have a housing shortage. State says we need to be building 180,000 units a year. We're building maybe 100. So the shortage is actually growing, continuing to grow, and there's a lot of resistance in local communities to have the kind of housing development that once was very popular in California, but became along the way unpopular in California. And I would say that the housing problem is the number one reason why California is having troubles these days, because that affects things like investment in the state. Why would you invest in a state if you can't get the workers? And you can't get the workers because they can't afford to live here.
Right.
And it becomes a kind of a vicious. So the people are saying, if I want workers, they've got to be able to live here. So maybe I should go someplace else. Maybe I should go to Austin or Nashville or someplace like that, where my workers can afford to live, and I don't have to pay them as much in those places, and they can still live better than they can in California.
Sure.
And this has a corrosive impact on the basic fundamental economy of the state, which then translates into other problems like population loss as well.
Well, I think your point about the bifurcation of the wealthy and the people at the bottom end, I think it might have been a column of yours I was reading, Dan, recently. Folks, we're talking to Dan Walters of Cal Matters, a really good website. I think Dan's the best writer at Cal Matters, but they cover different perspectives, and it's just you should check it out if you want to learn more about what's wrong with California. There's also some commentary that probably maybe not agree as much as Dan's perspective or my perspective, but it's great to have him here, California expert, as the Southwest Public Policy Institute expands from our core of Southern Nevada through Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. We are reaching out, of course, to Oklahoma, Colorado, Utah, and California, and we need to have the largest state in the union. We need to have a great base there, and we certainly welcome anyone watching who doesn't know about our organization, is tuning in if you're from California. Dan, your point, I do think I saw it. My whole show prep for today was just reading Dan Walters' columns, because there's a lot of range there, and Dan knows the state. I've seen this in my native New England, particularly in the state of Connecticut, where I was raised. I think it's a problem in New Mexico, particularly in greater Santa Fe, certainly. This idea that progressive policy model that's supposed to be, what do they say, an economy that works for everyone, there's a lot of evidence that it doesn't work for everyone. It really divides your community, your state, your region into the haves and have-nots. And you're talking about poverty, the high poverty rate, the outrageous housing costs. It's interesting that you bring that up, because it's also some honest people on the left, I think, also bring it up. When you're carving out the middle class from your state, and you're left with, entertainment billionaires and tech billionaires, and then, very, very low end of the socioeconomic spectrum, what does that mean for the health of your state in general? California is following very aggressively that blue state policy model that's been implemented elsewhere, and these results, they're not the results it doesn't result in an economy that works for everyone, does it?
No, it doesn't work for everyone, and it has other ancillary effects, like the enormous homelessness problem, worse than any other state, not only in absolute numbers, but in proportionate numbers as well. Homelessness, and now we're seeing crime. Crime has now raised its ugly head as an issue in California, and it seemed to have been dampened down, but the kind of sort of crime that really makes people feel nervous, the smash and grab robberies of stores, smash and grab stuff out of cars. In San Francisco, it's an epidemic, and it's killing the tourist industry in San Francisco, because people's tourist cars, rental cars, are getting broken to right and left. There's actually a video out right now on X, as we now call Twitter, showing a smash and grab of a tourist's car with the cops nearby and not doing anything. And it's the sort of thing that builds a reputation. You don't want to go to that place, and you don't want to live in that place. And the same thing's true in Southern California. So yes, if you look at the numbers, the crime rate doesn't seem to be terrible, but it's the sort of crime that really bothers people. It's the sort of thing that says, I'm not safe walking the street type of crime. I'm not safe even in my own home, with follow home break-ins and that sort of thing. And so the authorities say, well, that statistically it's not as bad as it used to be. And people say, I don't care. I don't like it. And this is now creating a backlash. The San Francisco's district attorney was recalled by San Francisco's very left of center voters because of that issue. For example, there's a recall now being mounted against the district attorney in Oakland, across the bay, for that same reason. And there's an effort to try to oust the district attorney of Los Angeles for that same reason, that people feel that they're so wrapped up in so-called criminal justice reform that they're not really being tough enough on street criminals that are plaguing both the San Francisco Bay Area and Southern California. So that's another quality of life issue, along with high living costs, high housing costs, that tends to drive people out of the state or make people not want to come. Look, there's a long list of, for example, of stores in downtown San Francisco that now shut their doors, saying we can't live here anymore because our people are these smash and grab criminals. All of downtown San Francisco, and to a certain extent, downtown Sacramento, same thing. It's a quality of life situation, and the quality of life is very important to people. And if they feel that California no longer offers quality, going to go elsewhere or not come here in the first place.
Yeah, I think a great post that went up just on Cal Matters a couple days ago. Martha Lennon, Lehnen, general manager of a Camping World store in Southern California. For more than 17 years, I've been a dedicated member of our company, witnessing firsthand the growth and transformation. When I started, property security was a minor concern, but as times have changed, broken windows, vandalized property, and stolen vehicles have become part of our reality. The alarming increase in commercial property crime made protecting our business and employees a critical and urgent necessity. And I believe the worst of it came, the tipping point came when a 40-foot bus was hot wired and stolen from our lot after thieves cut through the fence and gate with a torch. Dan, you're talking about the average citizen being affected by this. How is the business community responding to this kind of nonsense?
Well, well, they're very upset about it. And here's the response of the legislature. A bill that would make employees suffer in crimes. I mean,
Yes.
you can't make this stuff up, right?
No, you cannot.
So they would be subject to lawsuits if they are deemed to have been not being proactive enough in protecting their employees from criminals. So, yeah, and this whole situation, the loss of population, the high living costs, the housing, all these things that kind of intertwine with one another, have really created a dominant political culture, which is overwhelmingly Democratic and overwhelmingly liberal. Liberals over all of these issues, over the crime issues, over the housing issues, over the homelessness issues. The Republicans are, they're just bystanders in California. They have no real clout at all. So you have now these kind of sort of fissures within the Democratic Party of California that you used to see between Democrats and Republicans. Now it's Democrat versus Democrat. And it doesn't seem to have a lot of ideological content. It's more perception than ideology, because you have very liberal Democrats on one side and very liberal Democrats on the other side of these issues. And a lot of it has to do with how responsive they are to the kind of quality of life issues that we're talking about. Let me shut off this silly phone. And those who feel that pressure from their constituents tend to be more adamant about, we got to do something, whereas those who don't feel that kind of pressure or ideologically ignore that pressure or kind of head in the sand thing, they're saying no, no, no. So right now, for example, one of the bills in the legislature one of these bills that's been going through periodically to cut down on the red tape to build more housing. This particular bill would extend that philosophy renew that philosophy, but would also take out an exemption for the coastal zone. In California, we've had these laws that saying to reduce red tape on housing, but it hasn't applied to the coastal zone where the wealthiest people tend to live, right? Well, this bill would remove that exemption for the coastal zone, so the coastal zone would have to start accepting more dense housing development. And obviously, the people in the coastal zone aren't happy with that. The environmental groups are not happy with that. And so there's this big further split between liberal Democrats on one side and liberal Democrats on the other side. And obviously, when you have that kind of an intra-party division, it kind of paralyzes everything. And it makes it very difficult then to actually enact the kind of, I hate to use the word reforms because it's an overworked changes that are necessary to deal with some of these issues in California, such as the high price of housing, such as homelessness and whatnot. I mean, the battles that are being fought, pitched battles in San Francisco and Sacramento and Los Angeles over what to do about these homeless encampments, these squalid camps that are all over the place in California. There's just no agreement. They just squabble and squabble and squabble what to do, and nobody can actually make any progress. You have, for example, the mayor of San Francisco now denouncing the federal courts dominated by fellow liberals for making it difficult to clean out homelessness encampments. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who has his reputation of being the most liberal governor probably in California history, is now siding with the folks that on the more conservative side of what to do about homelessness and what to do about and housing and some of these more things. It's when you try to look at what California is going through politically in the face of all of these very strong existential quality of life issues, it makes your head dizzy. It's not Democrats versus Republicans. It's Democrat versus Democrat, and Democratic interest group versus Democratic interest group. Democratic interest, you got labor on one side, the environment's on the other, and all this stuff. And it just kind of paralyzes policy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it'd be easy, if it was Democrats versus Republicans, the Democrats would prevail, but this is not. And it's a very difficult situation. So there's very little progress really being made on any of these issues.
Well, it's a great point, because so often we look at states where we see a total, you could say Republicans in Idaho or Democrats in California, and they just assume that they get their way. But those intra-party squabbles can be significant. And this I think prompts the next question on this issue of liberals versus liberals, your wonderful phrase. On the issue of education, you've got the teacher union, sort of big money, big lobbying force, versus polling data, which shows poorer people of color are really starting to take a look at this issue of school choice and want more options to get their kids out of these horrible unionized government schools, and that's your only option. Is that fight playing out? Is there liberal on liberal crime when it comes to school choice in California?
Yes, and I'll give you an example of it. California left its schools closed longer than just about any other state during the pandemic. And in the aftermath of that, when they finally opened, academics started rolling in and trying to figure out what effect that had on children. And the effect was, as turned out, it was serious. It was a great decline in educational achievement, particularly among poor and non-English speaking students. In other words, the achievement gap that was already evident in California got wider during this pandemic. And it was the teachers union that basically drug its feet on reopening the schools, and the governor was kind of paralyzed. He said, yes, you should reopen. Yes, you should reopen. But he wasn't willing to take on the teachers union over that issue because he faced a recall election at the time and needed their support. So what's in the aftermath of all this, you have all these studies that say basically, yes, it really had a huge detrimental effect on education in California for all students, but particularly for poor students and non-English speaking students. So what's going on now, there's a lawsuit that's been filed against the state for that reason by civil rights organizations. And the state is taking an attitude as, we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. If there's learning loss, it's because the locals didn't handle this thing correctly. We didn't do anything wrong. And at one point, they even tried to muzzle researchers into educational achievement, invoking a clause in these research contracts that say you shall never testify against the state in any lawsuit whatsoever, even though you're not using the information we're giving you. And that created such a furor that now the state has lifted that. Yes, you can testify, but you can't use you can't use the information you get from the Department of Education to testify about learning loss in California. And this is the sort of squabbling that goes on. So you have very liberal organizations behind this lawsuit suing the state, which was basically compliant with another very liberal organization, the California Teachers Association. So once again, it's liberal versus liberal on the issue of learning loss during the pandemic and whether California should have, in fact, closed the schools, or if it did close the schools, it should have done a much better job of homeschooling and Zoom schooling and that sort of thing for these kids who were left out dangling on their own without the proper resources to be able to continue their educations. And it's an obvious civil rights issue. And it's basically saying the very blue state of California and the very blue California Teachers Association damaged poor children. The kind of only in California things you get now as the state undergoes this period of tremendous angst over population loss and housing and homelessness and crime and education issues. And in the meanwhile, of course, the governor of California is out there trying to polish up his image as a national political figure and not really paying that much attention to what's going on in California, is probably as much as he should be paying attention to it. And if you look at things in the abstract, I guess, how could the governor of California legitimately try to advance a political career to the White House? Well, he swears up and down he's not interested in the White House, but he's obviously kind of looking ahead to 2028. How could he possibly do this with all this stuff that's going on in California? I mean, if you think about it, all you would have to do in opposition research to Gavin Newsom in a presidential context would be just to show a lot of videos of all these homelessness encampments all over the state that are clogging up the sidewalks of downtowns all over the state, and with the runaway drug problems and everything. It would be like an Oppo researcher's dream. And you know, you've been in politics, you know about Oppo research, right?
Oh, definitely.
It's like shooting fish in a barrel. But yet he seems to think he has a role to play in national politics, even though he's going to be, you know, 3 years or so, he's going to be out of office and presumably trying to advance his career. And none of these problems show any signs of all of being resolved within the next 3 years. He actually made an allusion to that the other day. He said something like, I have now a sell date like you have in food store. I now have a 3.5 year sell date. So I've got to get some stuff done.
Okay. What have the last few years been about?
Newsom speak. He speaks in these kind of weird allusions like sell date.
Yeah.
He said he always requires a translator to be sitting there right next to you and telling you what he really means as he produces these enormous levels of food salad that don't seem to make any sense whatsoever.
Well, I'd recommend that people, if you can go online.
DeSantis, right?
Oh, you will have fun more than most. If anyone wants to learn more than you would care to know about the governor of California, I suggest go online and look up the Adam Carolla back and forth with Gavin Newsom when he was, I think, lieutenant governor a number of years ago, where Adam just really just picked him apart and just tore him to pieces. We're talking to Dan Walters of the great website Cal Matters. You can go there, folks, to learn about all things California. That's our subject today. Just to go back on something, circle back on something Dan mentioned about the lawsuit. I think it's out of Oakland, Dan, up north in California, regarding the lost learning that happened in light of remote learning, which there wasn't much learning. Dan, just 2 days ago on the 23rd of August, California walks back decision to muzzle researchers testifying in pandemic education lawsuit by Dan Walters at Cal Matters. That was just posted a couple of days ago if you want to read Dan's work. And there is no paywall on Cal Matters. So as someone who...
No, everything's free at Cal Matters.
Yeah, it's great, folks.
Except our salary.
Well, yeah. But I'm sure there's a lot of very generous donors who help out for a website like that. Again, Dan Walters, if you want to weigh in, folks, if you want to ask Dan a question, he knows way more about California than I do. Whatever platform you're logging into, watching us, just shoot us a question or a comment or a criticism. And I want to stay on this issue of government accountability, because it's something that we do very much at the Southwest Public Policy Institute. We care very much about. We have lawsuits in Arizona and New Mexico, and our president, Patrick Brenner, who you saw earlier, I think he's kind of licking his chops to be suing the other states in our region. He's just looking for good opportunities to do that, to leverage our knowledge of FOIA and IPRA laws to get information that government may not want to release. As a journalist for decades and decades, government transparency and availability of documents is, of course, important to our guest, Dan Walters. Dan, this recent, some people might say, oh, this is just this sort of little esoteric thing where a small publication up north was looking into this. But I believe it's the state Department of Public Health. A local newspaper was trying to look into regulation of a bio facility in their community, and the state responded in a very sort of arrogant and dismissive fashion. I read your column about that, and I just tell our viewers about that, because to anyone concerned about government transparency and accountability, that's a concern.
Well, in Fresno, which is about the middle of the state, a building inspector went out to look and found something leaking out of a building, a hose sticking out of the building, and it led to the discovery of this laboratory inside of a warehouse that I don't think anybody really knew existed, and it's still being kind of figured out. But apparently, these people had some kind of contracts with government entities to do testing of some kind. But suddenly, you have this abandoned laboratory. And when a local news site in Fresno called GV Wire tried to look into this thing and call up the state authorities and just ask them very routine questions about how do you license people and sort of that, they just got stiffed. Basically, they said it's none of your business for all intents and purposes. And of course, this isn't a gigantic news organization. It has lawyers on the payroll that can go out and immediately sue them. And as I pointed out in the column, and I guess you could say the same thing about these muzzling of the researchers in education. One of the impacts of one-party rule in California has been the shutting down of public information, that the state agencies are being more stonewalling more when people file the Freedom of Information requirement, the public, what we call in California the Public Records Act, that meetings of public agencies are being there's a bill in the legislature that would allow the emergency regulations that allowed agencies to meet via Zoom without physical presences would make it permanent.
Oh.
And so you would be at the mercy of whoever's presiding over the meeting, whether you even get to speak or not.
Wow.
You wouldn't even know where these meetings were being held. There's been a big cry about that. We had another recent article about it in Cal Matters. So we're seeing all throughout government at all levels a kind of an increasing creeping secrecy, I guess you would call it. Creeping resistance to openness, those sorts of things. And I think it just basically reflects, well, we can do it, so we will, or we can get away with it because who's going to say the news media are weak now? They don't have as many reporters. They're financially weak. We can tie them up in court forever and ever and ever. And so we'll just do whatever we feel like doing, like that situation with the Department of Health. And what are you going to do about it? If you don't like it, tough, sue us. And then you go through all that stuff. Now, there are organizations in California that try to keep openness alive. News organizations are hiring lawyers. They are suing the state in some cases. There is a pretty active First Amendment coalition in California that takes on those issues. And fortunately, the state government itself has two watchdog agencies that are totally independent. The state auditor's office and the California's legislative analyst's office that are by tradition and practice very independent, and they use their powers to go in and search out information that a lot of politicians would not like them to know. I keep waiting for the politicians to crack down because both of these agencies live at the mercy of the governor and the legislature. And I keep waiting for the crackdown to occur. And it hasn't occurred yet. And so we'll see what happens. But there is resistance to what's going on.
That's
and in the case of the muzzling, the fact that an education website called EdSource took this on, revealed that these people were being muzzled and kind of raised a stink about it, that finally the state, partially at least, backed down on the thing because it was another one of those cases of arrogance. Sue us, okay, but we're not going to let you testify. We're not going to let anybody testify to help your case get along. I mean, if in fact the closures during the pandemic materially damaged the educations of children, particularly poor children, why would you not want as much information about that to be aired as possible in the interest of fairness? If you're having a lawsuit, a lawsuit's supposed to get to the meat of the matter. It's supposed to air these things, but you're trying to basically put your thumb on the scale and prevent it from happening. We're also seeing another aspect to this one-party rule in efforts to shut down access to the ballot for ballot measures to make it more difficult to qualify ballot measures. Because what's happened is, because when you have one party government, and despite their squabbles over specific issues, most of the Democrats kind of go along with each other very much. But what's happened is, as business has been subjected to new expenses or regulations by a very liberal legislature, business has gone out to the ballot and challenged these things via referendum or by ballot initiative. So the latest wrinkle is to try to make it more difficult for people to qualify ballot measures that would overturn laws passed by the legislature. And that's a brand new wrinkle that's going on right now in the closing days of the legislative session, whether they're going to try to do that or not. So I tell you, I've covered California politics for many, many years, over about a half a century, basically. And go back to Jerry Brown's first governorship, which when there was very vigorous two-party competition in the legislature and the electoral arena. Republicans were winning a lot of statewide offices and so forth. And to watch that transition into one-party rule is one of the more fascinating experiences I've had. And I'm very few of us have had that experience, because you had to have been there for all this thing going back 50 years or so. And very few journalists in Sacramento are even that old, much less have that. So it's been very interesting to me to see how one-party rule has manifested itself in California. And now, if I was in Ohio or you mentioned Idaho or someplace, it would be very fascinating to see how that one-party rule is going. It's just the dynamics of having one-party rule. In California, Democrats have 3/4 of all the seats in the legislature, as well as the governorship and all other statewide offices, and well as local governments for the most part as well. It's a very interesting thing. I mean, it's just in the sense of historical context of political history, it's a very interesting, and it's an experiment that in governance, is what happens when you have one party rule in a supposedly democratic political system. It's very interesting.
Well, and I think a lot of PhD theses in political science, I would hope, will be written over the years as the country moves. The redder states become more red and the bluer states become more blue. And, what does that mean for the average citizen? And when one party and one dominant ideology is sort of allowed to implement so much of its agenda, and their compromises are never struck, and bad decisions are never rolled back by elections.
I think you're already seeing it in things like in the wake of the Supreme Court's abortion decision, how red states are replying and how blue states are replying, and how the cross-country rivalries now are opened up, say between California and Florida and Texas, and over California being an abortion sanctuary state, and these other states putting restrictions on abortions and want to put the people in jail and that sort. And the immigration thing, Florida and Texas sending undocumented immigrants to California. We're seeing an awful lot of state-to-state rivalries going on right now. And as you say, as this syndrome continues, if it does continue, it probably will, this will become even more. So you'll have bodies of law in one state that will be totally different in the next door state. And that's another one of those fascinating situations. How do you cope with that if you're traveling from state to state to state? Something is legal in one state, illegal in the next state, legal in the next state, illegal in the next state. It's kind of like the days of prohibition or pre-prohibition, when you had dry states and wet states, and people would go from the dry states over to the wet state to get liquor and then take it back to the dry states. Yes. Things like that. You're seeing the same kind of and on a very serious mood, it means it adds to the polarization and the disunity of the United States. We start then thinking of ourselves not as Americans or citizens of the United States so much as residents of a particular state that has a particular unique political environment that's different from the unique political environment of every other state. there's something kind of dangerous about that, I think. If there's some of these kind of basic fundamental conflicts, it's really strange. I'll give you a kind of a personal example of it. I'm a shooter. If you look on well, you don't have video, but if you see a target on my wall behind me, I'm a shooter. I'm a gun owner, and I shoot. I go to the range and I shoot. I have a concealed weapons permit in California. It's not good in any other state other than California. But for a while, I had a concealed weapons permit in Arizona, which you can get even if you're not a resident of Arizona. Oh. And if you have that concealed weapons permit from Arizona, it's good in 35 other states.
Reciprocity, sure.
But not in California.
Yep.
So that's just one example of what I mean by, if let's say you have an RV and you have a gun in your RV, you can travel with it in one state, then the next state, what happens? And then you get arrested for having a gun in your RV, it really drives wedges between people, I think, in a large context. And a lot of that, I think the fact that so many people have left California in recent years is one aspect of that. I think not all of them, but at least some of those people are leaving just because they don't like the political climate in California and they want to go to someplace else that they feel more at home. And in some cases, it's taxation. California has an extremely high personal income tax. Next door in Nevada, there is no income tax. In Texas, there is no income tax. In Florida, there is no income tax.
Tennessee. Yeah.
And so a certain percentage of those people that are leaving California are tax refugees. There is a whole colony of expatriate Californians on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe that have a whole village up there. There's nothing but Californians who have shifted their official residence from California to Nevada, even though they still have homes or whatnot in California. They get driver's licenses and they change their official residence, and suddenly they don't have to pay any income tax because they're 100 feet on the other side of the state line.
Incline Village, yes.
And
yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes called Income Village.
Have made that change to Nevada for exact same. Yeah. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago about a couple that had changed their residence from Hillsborough, which, as you know, is a very trendy, very expensive community in the San Francisco Bay Area, to Lake Tahoe. And they gave all sorts of reasons why they were leaving. And the Wall Street Journal never mentioned the most obvious reasons was they don't have to pay any income taxes in that. And that's a very difficult thing for California because California is inordinately, incredibly reliant on rich people for its taxes.
Yep.
The income taxes on the top 1% of taxpayers, that's about 170,000 taxpayers in a state of 40 million, pay half of the income taxes in California. And income taxes are 3/4 of the state's revenue stream.
Right.
So they're paying all by themselves about 35 or 40% of all the state's revenues, these 1%ers. And if more of them leave, like Elon Musk left California and changed his residence to Texas, that will have a deteriorating impact on the state. I say will, it's probably already having a deteriorating impact, and explains it's one reason, although not the only one, why California now has a $30 billion budget deficit suddenly.
Yes, that's my last question for you, Dan, because we are running low on time. All the trends we've discussed, deteriorating education situation, people leaving the states, ridiculous cost of living. We didn't really get too much into the never-ending pressure in blue states to just continually expand the welfare state, offer free college and offer free diapers for single mothers, all that kind of stuff. California has to pay its bills. And at a time when many states, even New Mexico, as blue as you get because of oil production here, are enjoying budget surpluses, California is really suffering under projected deficits moving forward. How can the state, there are legitimate functions, even as a libertarian, I will admit there's legitimate functions for all state governments, particularly law enforcement, prisons, and things like that. There are reasons the government needs to spend money. The fiscal situation in California is really projecting out the out years, getting really, really dire. I'm going to wrap up with that question, Dan, and let you riff on that, folks. You are watching episode 22 of SPPI-TV. We're talking to Dan Walters of Cal Matters, a great journalist and a columnist, and you can read his work on the Cal Matters website. And we're going to wrap things up with the issue of how does this state that's struggling under all these challenges, I mean, how can it pay its bills, Dan?
Well, it's been paying its bills very well until just now, basically. And it supposedly had $100 billion surplus a year ago, which was pie in the sky, as it turned out. Yep. And they made a lot of decisions based on that assumption. And now they're having to roll them back. The expectation of the experts is that this deficit problem will continue on, at least for the rest of Gavin Newsom's governorship, if not beyond. And the official attitude seems to be, well, it's just a blip and things will return to normal. So they fashion budgets that basically assume it's just a blip, and they borrow here, borrow there, delay expenditures over here, kind of bookkeeping fixes, if you will, to the problem, so that on paper it seems to balance out. But if in fact it does continue, if there's a structural deficit, as the experts call it, which now seems likely, if not probable, then the problem just gets worse. And then all the hopes and dreams of the left wing in California to make California a Sweden-like experience will face reality. And then, of course, to the people on the left, the answer to that is raise taxes. But who are you going to raise taxes on? There actually are tax the rich bills in the legislature, right? And they're not going anywhere at the moment. But to a certain element of the politics, to raise the taxes on the rich, which of course would drive more of them out of the state.
Exactly.
I would say that there is a kind of a head in the sand mentality about it right now. But if it continues on, there is going to be a kind of a point at which you have to decide one way or the other what's going to happen.
Sure.
And I would say Gavin Newsom efforts to raise his political profile for national office will really go into the toilet if California becomes chronically ridden by budget deficits and they have to start cutting back on all the welfare state that they've already legislated.
Sure.
It's going to be like many things in California, a very interesting thing to see develop one way or the other.
It won't be boring. I don't think anything in California ever is. And folks, when you hear that phrase structural deficit that Dan cited, folks on the left are always peddling. I usually respond with structural overspending. And that's what we need to tackle in our states. And that doesn't make me a lot of friends in government. Thank you for joining us, Dan. We're going to have you back on. We hope to have you on a couple times a year to talk about what's going on in California. I'm not kidding when I say Dan's forgotten more than the rest of us will ever know about California. People want to read your work, which Dan, one of the first things I do every morning when I'm just checking the news every morning is I go over to Cal Matters and see what Dan Walters is writing. How do people get in touch with you and read your work?
calmatters.org. See, one word, CALMATTERS.org.
That's as simple as that, folks. Our guest has been Dan Walters of Cal Matters. This has been episode 22 of SPPI-TV, folks. We're going to be on hiatus next Friday because that's the big party end of summer weekend. But we will be back. We'll see everybody back in September. Thanks, folks. And thank you, Dan. And everybody have a good holiday. Take care.